When Adele Freeman fired a 5.38 caliber bullets into her boyfriend in 2000, she contributed to an often overlooked statistic within the sometimes deadly world of partner abuse, namely that more than one-third of all homicides each year connected to domestic violence are perpetrated by women. Men can be victimized in the same way women can, said Laura Martin, the Calvert County MD state's attorney who helped secure Friedman's first-degree murder conviction in 2002. And it's not just the violence, it's about control, dominion, power. The fact that female abusers and male victims is often lost in a discussion of domestic violence. In fact, women advocates have used selective statistics, the same federally funded survey that found women are as equally abusive to men, to bolster their plea for funding and services. That absence of attention to the men's side of the coin has contributed to an imbalance of services for men in abusive relationships. This is the best kept secret on family violence, says Murray Strauss, a sociologist who led the Commission survey in 1975 and again in 1985 with the same results. There's a tremendous effort to suppress and deny these results. Now, no one disputes that when physical violence occurs, women are prone to more serious injury than men. However, Strauss and others caution that this should not obscure the fact that about a third of men sustain injuries from partner violence, even homicide. Bill Hall of Adams House, a health and wellness center in Suitland, MD, agrees. He called domestic violence an equal opportunity issue that often gets overlooked by the 24 or so women's advocacy centers throughout the state. Each Monday night, he and his wife Stacy counseled two groups of some 30 women and 65 men. Within each group, about 70% have been court-ordered to attend by the 90-minute long counseling session aimed at curtailing future violent behavior. In dealing with those who've punched out girlfriends and choked wives, socked boyfriends, stabbed exes, and even shot at spouses, both halls agreed that domestic violence is anything but a one-way street of male and female violence. Most women who abuse in their relationships do so because they feel pressured and don't feel that they can communicate in any other way, Stacy Hall said, because he's just not listening, and men are much bigger than we are. But other advocacy groups ignore female on male violence. Take one particular point from a brochure sponsored by Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence, a state advocacy coalition backed largely by federal funds. Every 15 seconds, a woman is battered in the United States by her husband, boyfriend, or live-in partner. To Michelle Cohen, the nonprofit's executive director, the statistics sound about right. There are male victims, of course, but the majority of victims who come forward are female, she said. Cohen said other data suggesting that men suffer for equal rates of violence are unreliable. That methodology is very controversial because, you're saying that every hit is equal and you're not taking into account context, she said. I think you have to look critically at those studies. Yet, both sides of the debate are actually looking at the same studies. That 1975 survey updated 10 years later that revealed nearly identical rates of abuse among men and women. I don't really want to quibble about particular stats, she says. Instead, Cohen pointed to the huge number of female victims she sees in need of assistance each and every day. I'm not relying on statistics. I'm relying on 30 years of experience. Sound familiar? That reliance on non-scientific data is no shock to Richard Gellis, who co-authored the 1975 and 1985 surveys with Strauss. People cherry-pick their numbers for advocacy studies, he said. This is what advocates do, and that's not sad. What's sad is policymakers don't create evidence-based policy. Gellis, Dean of the School of Social Policy and Practice at the University of Pennsylvania, offered up the Violence Against Women Act as an example. Since 1994, the act has doled out some $4 billion to states, dollars aimed at eliminating domestic abuse, stalking and sexual assault through increased financial, legal, and housing support to women. The act has also upped the penalties against offenders and more closely knits prosecutors, judges, police, and victims advocates to the effort. Testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee last May, Gillis said that law, which is set for reauthorization in 2011, mostly ignores services and resources for male victims of abuse. No other federal legislation dealing with an aspect of family violence, including child maltreatment, sexual abuse, and elder abuse, singularly focuses on one sex, he testified. Before the law's passage, the Washington Post wrote a story on the impact of the slaying of Nicole Brown Simpson and the implication of her husband, former football star O.J. Simpson, in her death. It was having a domestic violence service providers. Battered women and abusive men, the story said, are calling area hotlines for help in record numbers. In that same story, Representative Donna Edwards, the MD co-founder and then executive director of National Network to End Domestic Violence, told the Post that 4 million women a year were abused by their spouses. But like the brochure, even that number appears to derive from the Gillis and Strauss's own published research, and could mean that men too suffer from 4 million cases of abuse each year. Edwards stated in a telephone interview recently that there is no credible evidence that there is 50-50 relationship in domestic abuse numbers. That is so not true. Instead, she pointed to an overwhelming body of research that shows men perpetrate as much as 95% of domestic abuse. Richard Davies, a retired Brockton, Massachusetts police lieutenant and author of 2 books on the subject of family violence, said those figures are inaccurate and outdated. There's nobody outside of radical feminism that accepts that 95% figure anymore, he said. Even the domestic violence network Edwards co-founded avoids the number, instead putting the rate of male batterers at 85%. That 85% equates to 588,000 annual victimizations of women 12 years old and up, according to its source. A 2003 crime data brief from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. And that's about 3.4 million victimizations shy of what Edwards told the Post in 1994. One of the ironies is that many battered women's groups use 1/2 of our data to show prevalence rates, said Strauss. But when trying to show who's doing the violence, they use crime survey data. For his part, Strauss faults feminism as well as colleagues within the academic community for underplaying the male victimization rates. So what if service is available to men? Larry Dugan, a public policy expert and associate professor at the University of Maryland, said you might not know of a need for men based on the services available to them. All these service providers, they do not let men on their premises, she said, recounting a case she was familiar with in which an alcoholic wife was abusing her husband. She really abused him, she says, and he had nowhere to go. In Maryland, the House of Ruth, one of Maryland's largest domestic violence service providers, will assist men, but active outreach efforts seem in short supply. We also work with men, said Program Development Director Sherry Parliament, referring to an abuser intervention program. According to Dorothy Lenning, director of the nonprofit's legal clinic, 77 men received some form of free legal counseling or services through the Montgomery County Circuit Court in 2010. That's about 8% of total 933 people the clinic served during that period. We don't discriminate, Lenning said, yet they don't advertise services for men. And that's a shame, says Stacey Hall of Adams House. The women's advocates need to realize that men are abused as well. It's something that is real.